So what we want to do now is we want to step up the complexity of some of what you've been doing in Premiere. We want to get you to a point where you're almost recklessly creative. You know, it's very easy to feel like, oh, there's a lot of buttons, I don't want to do anything wrong. And I want you to get to a point of confidence to where you understand how to layer things and move things around and trim more aggressively. We're going to talk about some of the additional tools, but all these things will lead to you being able to do something probably a little more creative than just the straightforward sort of basic 3-point editing we've talked about up until now. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're going to import some footage. All right. I have sort of an example sequence here of some elements that I've put together. I'm going to show you sort of how I did it. But we've got some stock footage here and we need to go get it. And then I will redo that sequence. But that's just to give you an idea of sort of what I'm talking about. We're going to layer some stuff. All right. So in your project, you probably go to clips or footage or wherever, and we're going to import a folder's worth of stuff. All right. So we're going to go File, Import. We're going to go to the Montage exercise, which should be inside a folder with a name kind of like that. Montage exercise is what it's called in the Edit and Color Media folder. It might be week 4 media if you're on one of the workstations in our lab, because sometimes it's gotten renamed by students. But basically, we're looking for a montage. In there, we'll find a folder full of sound and a folder full of footage. Okay, I gave you like 3 songs to work with and some footage. But I don't want to have to create the bins, so I'm going to go back to where I've just clicked on the name of the entire thing. And then if I were on a PC, I would do import folder, and I'm on a Mac, so I can just hit import. And if I do that, then I get this into my system. And in there are the 2 bins it made for me with all the footage and all the sound. All right, so I'm going to double click the footage because I'd kind of like to see it in its own tab. And if you don't have yours set already, I'd take it off list view and go to icon view. This is a very visual thing, right? I want to be able to see sort of what is happening in each of these shots. So I like that. But I am going to have to create a sequence as well. So now that that stuff's in, I'm going to go into my sequence bin. I'm going to double click it, make sure I'm in here. I already have my example sequence, but you're going to create a new one. File, New, Sequence. And we're going to go through and make sure that it is a custom sequence with 23976, 1920, 1080, square pixels, progressive, right? Get used to these patterns. And then we're going to use the QuickTime codecs, specifically the Apple ProRes codec. And I'm using LT, which is totally fine. You can use the normal one if you want. And I'm going to call this montage example. All right, I hit return, it loads it. Awesome. So let's go back to that footage and let's go grab a shot. So I'm going to look at some of these shots and I'm going to see sort of what I'm dealing with here. I kind of like the plane flyover. That's cool. Maybe we'll use that in a minute. But what if we combine the plane flyover with the water? That might be interesting. I haven't done that before. All right, so I'm going to mark an in and an out, just arbitrarily sort of picking a moment in this that I like, and I'm going to grab just the video and I'm going to drag it down here. And when I do, it says, wait a second, this is not what your sequence is set to. Do you want to keep your existing settings, or do you want to change them to match your footage? Almost 99% of the time, you do not want to change it to match your footage. We have it set right, thank you. Keep the existing settings. So now if I hit my favorite key, the little backspace thing over or backslash over return, I can scale it up and I can see what I'm doing. All right, so I've got this shot, and if I play it, it doesn't last super long, but I've got a shot there. Now my layers are pretty thin, so I'm going to command plus get it up to where I can see it. I don't need the audio right now. But we're just going to do an example here, and then we're going to throw some audio in so you can see how these skills relate. All right, so you notice I have a line on my clip. That is the opacity. All right, if it's not there for you, A, you may have your line too thick, this track too thick, so you may need to thicken it up. All right, or B, you don't have keyframes showing. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you go into the wrench, you can go up here and you say, I want to see video keyframes. If it's off, that line is not there and it goes away. So I'm going to turn it back on. So I'm going in the wrench of the timeline and I'm making sure keyframing is on. That way I can see it. All right. So I just want to show you that it's there because on the next shot, we're going to manipulate it. So I said the plane flying over was kind of cool. Where was it? This one. Yeah, the one where it flies right over the scene. Okay, so I'm going to go to right before the plane flies, mark it in, go to right over it, mark it out. And then I'm going to drop it on top. So I'm just going to grab the video and I'm going to drag it up here. And clearly I didn't have enough water shot, so I'm going to pull that out a little further. I trimmed it back. All right, so now I have two shots on top of each other, but the top one is fully solid. If I want to blend them together, I have to pull the opacity down, right, in order to sort of see that through there. However, I want to keyframe it. Look at how those shots are going to line up so nice. You know, we might actually just say, oh, well, what if we just line them up there and we know that's the moment they line up. Maybe that's the moment we go from the airplane to the water. So I could go back here and I could say, all right, let's just right click on this and let's do a dissolve, which needs to be a little longer. And maybe I want it to match up a little bit better. So look at that. Now we got a plane that flies over and then it cross dissolves into the water. That's pretty cool. But a cross dissolve is kind of a cheat. There's nothing wrong with that, but I want to show you another way to blend two shots together. So if I click on the cross dissolve I made, which all I did was click on the end, I right clicked and did default transition in case you missed how I did that. I can actually click on just the dissolve. It turns white and I can delete it and now there's no cross dissolve. But I can emulate what was happening with keyframes, with them displayed. So I'm going to use a different tool than we've used so far. I'm going to go here to the little pen tool, which is also the letter P. And I'm going to go, okay, I want to go to when the ground is almost even, right? Because we're trying to line it up with the water. So about there, it's probably pretty close to right. I can move it later if I'm wrong. And I'm going to mark a keyframe on this opacity line. And then I'm going to go to the end of my timeline, or I'm sorry, the end of that clip, the part I've used. And I'm going to set another keyframe and I'm going to pull that keyframe down. So at that moment, it's all the way down, which means the top layer becomes completely transparent. So it goes from being solid to completely transparent, which means it goes away. Even if my clip, I'm going to hit letter V to go back so I can trim again. Even if my clip went on, we'll never see that plane because it's all the way down, okay? So this is a way to sort of orchestrate your keyframes on the timeline, not in the effects control area. You can still do that. If I go to effects control and I click on it and I go to opacity, sure enough, there's the keyframes I set. But this is a little flying blind, whereas I kind of like being able to do it down here. So I recommend you do, if you're doing just simple opacity, do it down here. All right, so let's say over this next shot, I'm going to retrim that back. Let's say that while we're on this shot, and I'm going to slide it down because I actually need a little more of it. So I'm going to pull it down. Right, the water never moves, so it doesn't really matter what moment I used. That's great. All right, hit my favorite key, rescale. Let's say I want to layer the flag over this shot. All right, so double click the flag, I find a moment that I like, and I'll mark an in and mark an out, and I drag it down here and I throw it over the top of the water. Now, if I want it to be semi-transparent the whole time, I don't want to do a dissolve, right? Because if I right click on this and do a transition, it's going to fade and eventually I hit full solid flag. Well, maybe I don't want to hit full solid flag. So I'm going to click on it, delete it. I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually get my little pen tool again and I'm going to say, okay, from here to here is when it's going to be as solid as it's going to be, but then after that it's going to fade away again and it will start from a point of faded. So now what I'm going to do is if I turn the pen tool off, I can actually go back to my arrow tool with the letter V, selection tool, and I can say, oh, I just want to grab this whole section from that dot to that dot, and I don't want it to ever be fully solid. So now it's going to fade up, never go fully solid because it stays in the same setting from this point to this point, and then fade away. Pretty cool. If I need more of that bottom shot, I can continue to trim this out. All right, and now when I hit play, it fades. We see it doubled for a little while and then it goes away, but it never took over, right? Because I don't allow it to completely get to 100% there. If I did, the water would be gone and we'd have only flag. All right, so this is simple playing. All right, that's all it really is. It's just a matter of manipulating and tweaking it. Now, this mentality of keyframes works for music as well. What? Yes, there's an easy way to mix music using the same basic ideas. So I'm going to go back to my project window and I'm going to go into the sound, which if you open it, there are just a handful of songs, and I'm going to grab a song. and I'm going to play it and see if I like it. Okay, that's kind of cool. All right, I'm just going to steal a chunk of it just so that I can do my example, but I'm going to mark an in and an out. And I'm going to drag just the sound, which is all there is, down to my timeline. All right, and that's just because I didn't want to have anything longer than what we're working on here. All right, so if I play this, now that's kind of cool, right? It makes a little dripping sound and then it goes on. So let's make our audio bigger. I'm going to do Option plus or minus and make it bigger. And if you'll notice, if I make it super big, there's a line here too. On this track, it is my volume. So if it's too loud, which it is, it's almost hitting 0 over here. That's too loud. I can turn the whole thing down. -6 is about as hot as you should normally ever let anything peak. So it's averaging around -12 there. And it might occasionally hit 6. If I go back to where it's loud again, I'll see if it hits 6. Yep, -6, but it didn't go any higher. That's pretty good. Yeah, so that's a decent volume for me to start with. All right, so I'm going to make it a little thinner because that's kind of ridiculous to have it that big. All right, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to move the sound in this song. Let's say when this shot ends, I want it to fade out. All right, so I'm going to take my music, I'm going to edit it to where it ends at the end of the video. I can say, oh, I want it, once the flag goes away, I want that whole shot to fade down. All right, so I'm going to do the old pen tool. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to say, yep, as soon as the flag is gone, I want it to start fading down as well. So I'm going to take the video layer and I'm going to have it dive. But let's say I want the music to do the same thing. Well, I have that line there. I can click on it and say, all right, starting there is the last moment that it will be at this volume, and from that point it will start fading down. And look at that. Now it even fades my sound. All right, kind of cool. So that audio works the same way. All right, it allows you to do up and down. Now let's say I wanted it during this beginning part to not have any footage, and then I want the plane to fly over at the boom. All right, so now it involves me moving a bunch of clips. So if I want to move a bunch of clips, I have to get off this pen tool because that's dangerous. So I hit the letter V to go back to the top tool, which is the selection tool. Now I can lasso these, and that literally just means you're drawing a box, and as soon as it touches anything, it includes it. So if I don't want to move the sound, I don't want to go down to where I touch the sound. It would just be this. This will totally work. Another method you can use, though, is a different tool, and that is this tool called the Track Select Forward. When you do that and you click on something, it grabs all the tracks that occur from that point forward. All right, but you have to be inside a track when you do it. So if my video tracks were thinner and I clicked outside up here where there are no tracks, it will not work. You have to be on the actual one of the tracks to make it happen. Now if I do this, it's going to move everything and I didn't have to take the time to lasso. That's great, but obviously I have a problem with my sound. I don't actually want the sound to move, so I'm going to undo it. If I don't want the sound to move, then I might want to lock the sound tracks. So there's a little lock in front of every track, and if I select that, if I click that, it'll lock this off, and it gives it a little gradient kind of line stripe look, and you can see it even where it's empty. Now if I click on one of these tracks, it grabs everything it can, but it can't grab anything locked, and I can move this down. So if my goal is to make that hit on the beat, then I line up the little waveform there with the shot, and now I can go back and play it and see if it did what I wanted. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I have a new problem because I moved it down, right? Because my music doesn't end there. So I might have to unlock it and say, oh, I want to move this down. So if I actually go back to the selection tool and move it down, now my keyframes didn't move. That is to be expected, and there are times when that is a convenience. In this particular case, it's not necessarily a convenience. If I had done an audio fade, a normal like dissolve, it would have just moved with the end of the clip as I trimmed it. What do I mean by that? Well, let's imagine I didn't do these keyframes. So I'm going to delete. I clicked on both of them and deleted it. So let's say it was still back here, and I had a dissolve on it. Now when I move it, look, the dissolve goes with it. So it doesn't matter where it goes, it's always going to be the same length, and it's going to end where it ended. So there are advantages to having it be a dissolve when it comes to audio. It just depends on how much you're moving around. But as you know, my goal is always get the technical stuff as much out of my way so that I can make creative decisions as possible. So that might be something I live with. And then when I go back and start finessing, I might replace my dissolves with keyframes just so that I have that finite control. So if I lived with the dissolve and got it to where I was kind of happy, I might say, okay, well, before I nuke that dissolve, let's go to our pen tool and let's just click right before the dissolve starts and make a keyframe there. Then I could go back to my little arrow tool, click on the actual dissolve, nuke it, go back to my pen, and add a keyframe that goes to the end. Now I know it's fading in the same way as the dissolve I had because I put the keyframe right before where it originally started to fade. So I have that kind of flexibility. All right. So these are basic stacking tricks, basic opacity tricks, basic audio mixing. All right, using the timeline to do your audio mixing is 80% of the job. There is a mixing tool which we will cover in a different lesson, but for now this will get you pretty close. All right, now the other thing I want to show you really quick is working with time. So I'm going to go to my footage and I'm going to find a shot that moves, that has some movement to it. I like this bridge shot because it has kind of a dramatic move. All right, so here's the whole move, right? It swoops in and around. So if I put this entire shot in my timeline and I scale my timeline so I can see it, I'm going to actually manipulate the speed of this shot. So what I want to do is I want to fly in really, really fast until I can see the flag, essentially the top of this shot, which is just right before the shot is over. So maybe I won't go quite that far, maybe about like this. All right, so this is a significant moment in time. So I'm actually going to hit the letter C so that I can cut it. All right, and I'm going to cut that with the little blade tool. All right, and then I'm going to speed up this first shot. Now I have what's called a match frame happening here. The last frame of this clip is perfectly where we pick up in the next shot. That's part of why I wanted to do it that way. So if I go back to the letter V so that I have my arrow tool and I right click on this clip, I can get to speed and duration. Now if I want to be super dramatic, it's going to have to be faster than 100% speed. So let's try 900% speed. All right, so it just made the shot much, much shorter, right? Because it's running faster, we run out of shot quickly. But that last frame over there is still the last frame before this clip. So if I pull this clip back and I butt it perfectly against the end, I can now go back to the beginning this, watch it play, and it will play super fast during this section, and then original speed the rest. Here goes. Pretty cool. Here it is bigger. Sound effects are very important. Sound effects will really prop up moments like this. Dramatic moments in the music will help motivate things like this. All right. That is your basic swoosh around. Pretty cool. All right. You can also have it be normal at the beginning and then speed up at the end. This clip doesn't have any tail on it, or I would demonstrate with it. It doesn't work if I don't have it. Okay. Now the next thing is, how do we do some advanced trimming? So we've done this sort of select all the tracks and push forward. We've done the blade. Now I want to show you the slip tool. So I need a shot where it's really obvious that this is happening. So let me get a shot. All right, so let's say that this flyover shot, we start off and we say, oh, I like that we fly over the sort of fork in the road. So I'm marking in and I'm marking out after we get over it, and I throw it in this timeline. And I throw it between my bridge shot and let's say this forest shot. All right, so I have this forest shot coming next. And I basically go, I've got this building thing, and then I want to go to the forest shot, and I go, I like the fork in the road. So I trim it back, and I'm like, cool, now I can see the fork in the road right before we go to the forest. And this is what I like. The problem is I look at it later and I say, or better yet, my client says, hey, I don't want to show that that road has a fork in it because it'll confuse people. I want it to just be flying over the road as if it's a no distraction single road. So how do I trim this? I can go back and try to mark a new section of the original clip and try to get it right. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is a lot of mouse clicks. What I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to just slide the moment that I'm already marked off here You know, I want to go here to there, but I don't want it to be the moment I'm seeing right now. So how do I trim just inside this clip? Well, that is where you're going to want to use your slip tool. All right. There are two modes for the slip tool. Okay. Slip and slide tool, right? They sound like they should go together. So we're going to use the slip tool, which is also the letter Y. So if you use the slip tool and you select it, you can go into this clip and you can move things around. And what you're actually seeing now is the beginning of your clip and the end of your clip. So if you don't want to see the fork in the road, then I'm going to move this clip to where we pass it up. So now the first frame will be right after, and then it shows you what will be your last frame. But notice it never changed the timing of when we left the bridge shot or when we went to the forest. All we did was change the moment that we are seeing within this hole. All right, so it's kind of like slipping it this way, and there's a window of what you can see, and you're seeing a different moment of it inside that window. Slip tool, super, super handy. Now the other thing to remember that is perfectly allowable in this exercise is if I actually zoom in, like we are blending the flag with this using standard opacity. Well, what do I mean by that? You can change blending modes in this example. So right now they're blending in a normal way, okay? Literally opacity is set to normal. You can change the way elements are combined. If I change it to dissolve, it looks a little bit different. If I change it to darken, it's going to give you a slightly different look. Multiply, color burn, it looks very different. Linear burn is kind of cool. Darken color gives you a different kind of blending. Lighten is completely different. Screen, color dodge, you should definitely play with these when you do some of your layering, because you will get very different types of effects depending on which one of these you choose. And I want you to experiment with it a little bit so that you understand the power of that. So like here, I just left it on vivid light. Let's see what that edit looks like with it. I didn't change any keyframes. I just changed the kind of opacity we're using, okay? Now it's a little sharper, a little more solid flag over the top of our image, okay? So I want you to play with that in your edit as well. Drop things in, stack, layer them, pick a piece of music. You don't have to necessarily use the music I gave you, but it's handy. Take the music, cut it to a reasonable length, about a minute long is fine, and put as many pretty shots in. Try to sort of give us some, motivate sort of what's happening in the music with energetic moments from the songs. And I want you to play with layering, and I want you to play with your keyframes so that we can basically do something very creative. There are no wrong answers, but I want you to basically try to break it. And if there's any tools over here I didn't cover, which I know there are, there's some ripple edits and some things that you might want to play with, okay? You're going to want to play with them and see what they do. So the ripple tool, just as an example, and it doesn't work very well if I use that shot, so I'm going to use a different shot. So let's say I have my two shots, the flying through the air and the forest shot. If I want to move where this seam happens, I have some ability to do those kinds of tricks using this tool, the ripple edit tool. It's also the letter B. So if I grab it, if I select it over here and I grab it, it's trying to move. If you notice, it's actually changing. It's keeping them connected. It's not trimming back like I would have gotten had I had the normal tool. All right, that would have created a gap. So this tool is trying not to create a gap. So when I do that, it's actually moving everything down, which could throw the timing off further down your timeline. So you got to be careful with it. All right. And then there's an alternate version of that, which is the rolling edit, which is a little safer. Now it's literally a trade-off. Every frame I trim off of this or add to this is going to trade from this. So it's only moving the seam, no length of time changed. Now you have more forest, less road. All right, that is a good thing, especially when you're editing to the beat and you go back and you realize it's a little sloppy. You can grab this and you'll trade frame for frame to get things on a beat and get it to work the way you want, okay? This is a super handy tool. I definitely recommend you playing with it a little while. But I want you to experiment and just try to break it and get to the point where you're confident that you can throw anything in the timeline, change its length, change its speed, combine it with something else, and do it in a way that will help hopefully fuel the ideas in your mind. Good luck to you.